black thing go from left to right, and I thought, I'm going to die out here. No one's ever going to know.
I couldn't believe what my eyeballs were showing me. I'll never forget how evil the eyes were. It was horrible. I mean, I've never seen nothing that evil.
It ran towards me at a rate that I can't even explain. Turned and stared at me, and this look of, I just want to kill you. I want to say it was human, but it wasn't.
He was yelling at me to grab a gun, grab a gun. I was like, for what? He said, just grab a gun. And there's footprints all the way to the door of my house. It had went inside my garage, all the way to the door.
911, what are you reporting?
Jesus Christ, you better...
Sir?
See ya!
Hello?
Get somebody out here.
What's going on now, sir?
That son of a bitch is about 6'9", I don't know.
Do you see him now, sir?
Yes, I'm looking right at him.
Uh-oh.
You're listening to Sasquatch Chronicles. Check us out online at sasquatchchronicles.com. If you've had an encounter, email me. My email address is wes@sasquatchchronicles.com. Welcome to the show, everyone. Thanks for being here tonight. Got a great show planned for you this evening. Got several witnesses coming up. I know I'll be having Linda on, and Linda had a very interesting encounter when she was young on a mini bike. Her and her cousin saw one of these creatures pop up over a brush and watch them. Interesting account. And I'll also be having Tim Coonbo Baker on. He's from the Bigfoot Outlaw Radio, and we'll be talking about Infrasound tonight, along with any other questions I can sneak in and ask him. But you know, infrasound and Sasquatch, there's kind of a debate going out there whether they give off infrasound. If you've had an encounter and you'd like to be on the show, shoot me an email. My email address is wes@sasquatchchronicles.com. I can't believe I'm at 300 shows. You know, when I very first started doing this, I honestly thought, I hope I can at least put out 5 shows that people will actually listen to. And to hit 300 is a huge milestone for me. Means a lot to me. I want to take a moment to thank all of the listeners, not only in the United States, but in the UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, all of the people who take time to listen to the show. You know, I get a lot of nice emails from people, and just thank you so much to everyone who's ever sent me a kind word. I absolutely love this. I never dreamed I'd be doing this for a living. You know, I was just a dumb guy that stacked lumber, and I found myself thrust into this position, and I absolutely love it. I love talking to people about their encounters. And again, if you've had any sort of encounter, shoot me an email. Again, it's wes@sasquatchchronicles.com. But I also want to thank all of my past guests who've ever been on the show. You guys and gals really are the ones that make the show. It's not, you know, so much anything that I'm doing. You guys make the show, and I want to thank past and actually future guests for taking the time to come out and talk about your encounters. It's been a great ride, and I don't even know what else to say. But thank you so much. Before we jump into it tonight, I want to welcome Tony to the show. Tony's been working on his own podcast called The Confessionals, and I've been kind of helping Tony get that up and running, and he's doing a great job with it. Tony, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, Wes.
And tell us about the podcast, The Confessionals, that you're doing.
Yeah, it's called The Confessionals, and it's kind of funny how it all came together. I run a group on Facebook called Pennsylvania Sasquatch Research. Last year, I was on my vacation, and instead of watching paint dry, I figured I'd do something productive. And I decided to start a YouTube channel. And so I started putting up videos and stuff of how, you know, just different things that I think of when it comes to Sasquatch and things like that. I just started thinking about how I have all these people that tell me the encounters that they've had. Up to that point, I hadn't really recorded it in any way, shape, or form. So I just came up with this idea called The Confessionals, And what I first started doing was I would take my cell phone and I'd just record our conversation on the cell phone. And then I just put like intro music, outro music, and throw it up there. And it was going okay and stuff, and people were listening to it. And some of the shows had a couple thousand views, and I was pretty excited about it. But I really wasn't taking it too serious. And then one day you actually reached out to me and said that you saw the show and you thought that it had potential if I took it a little more serious. And so I decided, you know what, I'm just going to give this a shot and I'm going to put it into a full-blown podcast mode. And that's what I did. And I had a little bit of experience with a little bit of audio production and stuff. I've been messing around with it since I was a teenager. So that part of it wasn't much of a challenge for me. I knew if I decided to do something like this, I'd be able to put on, a quality show. But what I was a little concerned about was just putting a show together from beginning to end that entertained people and also informed them. But so far, it's coming together pretty well. My first show was a Sasquatch encounter. A guy named Tom in Western Pennsylvania, he is a farmer. He owns 2 different farms. And last year in August, he was setting up a blind for hunting season. And he saw, well, first of all, he heard sounds, like he heard like grunting. And he didn't really pay much of mind to it, but it kind of got more and more aggressive. And it actually wound up escorting him out of the woods, where he got in his truck. And I think he said when he looked in his mirror, he actually saw the body standing there swaying between trees. And so that was his first encounter. And, he freaked out about it and all that, went back home and talked to people, and nobody really wanted to talk to him about it. And his second encounter was later that year in December. He was actually in a tree stand hunting, and a female came busting out of the bushes, running away from something. He said she looked really like upset. And he said he got a great look at the body. And actually, he said he couldn't really go any higher than the breast. He said once his scope caught the breast, he said he couldn't stop looking at that area because it was so real to him. And he said he couldn't believe what he was seeing. And so in that short amount of time from August to December, he saw 2 of these things that he never thought existed. He spent his entire life out there farming the land, and he never thought these things were out there. And since then, he's just been totally consumed with it. So that show was actually a pretty good show. But since then, I've been taking different encounters, UFO encounters. We actually just had a Nephilim show last week, and that was a pretty good show. I had a biblical professor come over to my house and record in studio with me. So the audio clarity was a lot better for that show. And it was a very interesting show, though. I very much encourage people to check it out.
It was a good one. I enjoyed that one. And I'm glad you're doing it. There's very few podcasts out there, like I said, that I listen to because they're so terrible. Most people, it's just a lot of hand wringing, a lot of patting on the back, no one really wants to hear that. People want to get to the encounters. And I enjoyed the show. I enjoyed the Nephilim show. I thought the guy you had on was pretty good. I wish you success in it, man. You do a great job, and I really do enjoy it. The only advice I'd give you is just treat people the way you'd want to be treated. As you grow and you do this and you talk to people, you start finding out real quick. If you treat people with respect and everything else, and I know you always do, they'll treat you the same way back. But if you get a chance, check it out. It's the Confessionals. You can get it on iTunes, Stitcher, a lot of different podcast players. I know he's on Blog Talk. Definitely check it out.
People can also go to the website. I have a website now. When I first started it, we didn't have a website, but I see the importance of having that. So the website is theconfessionalspodcast.com, and there you'll be able to listen to the shows. And I have like a story section of how this all kind of came about, and a section of the team where it's me, my wife, and a buddy of mine for now. But yeah, just check out the website, and you'll probably get all the information you need there.
Perfect. And it's theconfessionalspodcast.com?
Yes.
Check it out if you get a chance. Definitely highly recommended to listen to it. I really enjoy it. Tony, thanks again.
Thanks, Wes.
The Confessionals Podcast. Definitely check it out. Let's jump into it tonight. I want to welcome Linda on the show, and Linda had her encounter in Michigan. Linda, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for being here.
You're welcome.
And if you would kind of start from the beginning, I know you had an encounter when you were young on the mini bike. To kind of walk us into that encounter. Tell us what you're out doing and walk us into what happened.
Okay, well, this was in Midland County, Michigan, and I was at my aunt and my stepuncle's house, and we were there for summer vacation, and my cousins and myself were all out in the backyard, and they were all excited. They had let me know that they got a mini bike, and our parents all took off for a drive somewhere, and we decided to take turns on the mini bike. And they had a trail that went out in the woods behind the house, and we would take turns riding the mini bike back there. And when it was my turn to get on the bike, I rode with my step-cousin, Kathy. Kathy was driving the mini bike, and I was behind her. I had never driven any type of motorcycle or anything before, so anyway, we got going down the trail. It's kind of, I'm not exactly sure how many yards, because I can't really remember. This was back in about 1978. This was in July, in the summertime. It was a real nice, clear, sunny day out. Wasn't overcast or anything like that. And we got going down the trail on the mini bike, and when we got to the clearing, they had this clearing back there, and they called it the turnaround. And it was kind of like, the whole trail and the turnaround was kind of like shaped like, if you can picture the number 9. And as soon as you get into the clearing, you go for a few feet, and it curves around in a circle to the left, and then you go around the circle, then you go back down the trail. Well, when we got into the clearing, right straight ahead in front of me, I looked up, and above these bushes, I think they were blueberry bushes, but the bushes were probably, I'm going to say probably 6.5, 6'2". I'm not sure exactly, how tall they were. But after I talked to my cousins about it, they all agreed that those bushes were at least 6 foot tall. But right above those bushes, there was a head of a creature watching us, looking at us as we're coming into this clearing. I looked up, and there it was. And it was just like frozen. It had like a frozen, it didn't twitch, it didn't move, but it was looking at us. And then just like this all happened really fast, like in that split second. I think Kathy must have saw it the same time I did, because she turned the bike over on us, and I burnt my leg on the muffler. It went right on my left leg. Of course, we all had shorts on. It was summertime. Well, I had shorts on. But, and we didn't say anything. We just both jumped back up and got the bike back up and got on the bike. And we took off out of there, and we went back. And, I was in shock. And I'm sure she was in shock, too, because when we got back and got off the bike and we started taking our helmets off, I asked her, I said, did you just see what I saw? And she said, yes, she saw it, but she didn't want to talk about it. And I could tell she was upset, and she went in the house. And now after that, of course, the next 2 kids were ready to take the bike from us, and they just took the bike from us and took off back there down the trail. And by the time they had come back, they didn't say anything. None of the other kids said anything about seeing anything that day. And I didn't say anything to them because after, the response I got from her, and first of all, I was in shock, and I didn't really know what I had saw. I know what it wasn't, but I didn't know what it was, at the time. And the thing that I remember most about this thing was its eyes. And you could tell it was alive just from the light in its eyes, that it was a real live thing, looking at you. And I know it was really big, and it was real dark, almost like a dark brown black. It had more like a round head. It didn't have any hair on its face, like around its eyes and nose and mouth. It looked smooth. The skin looked smooth, and it looked real dark, almost black. And it kind of had, its nose was flat. It had a big nose, but it was flat. Now, I don't remember seeing the nostrils. It was more like the nose went down where you couldn't see the nostrils, but it was quite a huge nose, and it had a big, wide mouth, and it did not show any teeth. It had its mouth closed. It just had its, it had a real long, I guess, lip line. I'm not sure how to describe it. But its eyes were huge. It had great, big, round eyes, and they were dark, like a real dark brown, almost black. And when I got on the back of the bike and we took off out of there, I didn't even turn around. Neither one of us, I didn't even turn around and look back. The whole time we were peeling out of there and getting out of that turnaround and going back down the trail, the thought did cross my mind in that split second that, this thing could come and rip me off this bike if it wanted to. But I couldn't turn around. I just got the instinctive feeling, and I think we both probably did that the best thing to do in that split second when we turned the bike over was just get back on the bike and just get out of there and not, make a fuss about it or kind of just act like we didn't see what we just saw.
I can imagine. I wanted to ask you, Linda, for someone, let's say the term Bigfoot and Sasquatch didn't exist, and you're coming down this trail, are you on the back seat of her mini bike or are you on your own?
No, I'm on the same mini bike. There's only one mini bike, so
I gotcha.
We had to take turns, yeah. And since I had never ridden or driven the bike before, I kind of think that's probably why they didn't let me try to take off on it on my own. And I was on the back with Kathy, and Kathy was in front of me. She was driving.
I got you.
She actually was driving. I was sitting on the back. Of course, I was like 13. This was back in 1978, so I was probably like 13. I'm guessing 13 or so. We were all a lot, younger then and smaller, so two of us could get on. Back then, I've got pictures I took that day, and not of myself, but I have pictures of the other kids on the bike, and my cousin Lori and their friend Roger. I have a picture of them on the mini bike together, and it was you could see it was a nice sunny day that day. The bad thing about the pictures is they don't tell you like what year or date and time on the picture, and I think that the pictures were taken with a Kodak 110 pocket camera, because it was a camera that I had that my parents had bought me for Christmas, the Christmas before, and I was out taking pictures with it was my camera. So, I got the film developed and everything, but I guess back then not everything, when you got film developed, not everything told you that information. So that's why I'm not sure if it was 78 or if it was 77, but I'm pretty sure it was 1978. After a couple of years of living in that house where this happened, they moved out, and my aunt and my stepuncle bought a piece of property in Midland County, but in a different area, and built a house. And that house where this happened at, it's still there today. And actually last summer we were all talking about this and decided to go for a drive out there because we were curious to see if the house was still standing or if anyone was living in this house. And we actually drove by this house, and it looked like the house was empty. It didn't look like anyone was living there, and it wasn't for sale. And it was just really creepy to look at the place. It's all overgrown in the back. You could see where the woods and everything have grown up. It doesn't have as much of a backyard as it did when they lived there.
Let me ask you, let's pretend for a moment the term Sasquatch and Bigfoot doesn't exist, and no one knows a description of what these creatures look like. For someone like that, if you were explaining to them what you saw, how would you explain to them what you ran into?
Well, when I got back to the house and I thought about that, and was trying to think of what I just saw, of course, the first thing that came to my mind was like a big gorilla because of the face being, smooth, and the nose being flat and everything like that, because I didn't know what I had saw, but in my mind, I think I was trying to find an explanation to what I had saw. So I think that was probably the first thing that came to my mind was like a big gorilla. even though even though I knew that it didn't really make sense for there to be a big gorilla back there, in the woods like that. That I think if I had to describe it as close to an animal that I know, I would say a gorilla.
I gotcha. And it's interesting, too, when you run into it, how people react. Sometimes people will flip out when they run into these things, and they'll tell everyone in the world that they ran into them. And then sometimes people won't say anything for years about running into these things. When you got back to the house, did you talk to anyone about what you saw?
No, only Kathy. I asked her if she saw what I saw back there, because I mean, when you see something like that and you've never had an experience like that before, and when you're looking at something and you don't really know what it is because it's something you've never seen before in your life, and you right away, like, okay, this, whatever this is, it's not like normal. It's not in my normal existence for this to be happening. I wanted to know if Kathy saw what I saw, because I'm thinking, am I crazy? And I know she saw it because she said she saw it, but she didn't want to talk about it. So after that, I didn't talk to anybody else about it for many years. It was quite a few years before I discussed it with my other cousins that were there that day. And I don't even remember what brought it up was my boy cousin that was there that day, my cousin Jim. He actually brought it up because years later we had a conversation one night, and he was telling us about this thing that he saw. Him and his friend Roger was walking down the road out in that area, and they had gone to the store or something. Anywhere they had to go, they had to go on foot or ride their bikes. Back then, parents didn't take you to the store and that kind of thing. You either walked or, you rode your bike. And he said they were walking down the road, and there was an apple orchard. And I'm not sure how far the apple orchard was off the road, but I mean, it was a ways. And they stopped, and they saw what they had thought was a bear picking apples off an apple tree out in this orchard. Well, they stopped talking and started watching it, and then he said all of a sudden this thing started walking on two legs and like walking to another tree and continued to pick apples off the apple tree. And he said that's when he realized, well, this isn't a bear, because bears don't continue to walk on, two legs like that. So I think he said he felt like they were in shock. And all of a sudden his friend is like, well, I got to get home. I got homework to do, I guess. And so his friend went ahead and started taking off. So he took off too, because then they got I think he was freaked out. They couldn't explain what they were seeing, but they knew it wasn't a bear, because bears don't walk around like that, he said.
And so you actually spoke with him about what you saw?
Yeah, I spoke with him. There was him and his sister, who both were there that day, when we rode the minibike when we were younger. She's the same age I am, and he's a year older than we are.
Oh,
and we were all at her house one night, and we were all talking about this. And when he brought that up, then I brought up what happened, of course, on the minibike that day, and we talked about that. And they were like, Lori's like, how come you never said anything that day to us? And I said, well, honestly, I said the way it was back then, I said, I thought you guys would just make fun of me, and tease me if I said anything. And I didn't really feel like anybody would probably believe me. Back at, we were like 13 and 14, and back at that age, everybody teased everybody.
Yeah.
We were kids, and that's the way it was. And, if you came up with any type of story like that, you were going to get teased. And that's the way it was,
Yeah. No, and I can understand that. I can understand, not really sharing what you saw. I wanted to ask you, so you guys are riding down on the mini bikes. This thing pops up. What is it, from about the chest up is what you're seeing?
All we could see was its head.
Its head, okay.
Yeah, I seen the full head of it, and I don't remember seeing a neck or shoulders. All I could see was a full head above the bushes. And I think it just popped up because as we came into the clearing, I didn't see it until after we already got into the clearing, and all of a sudden it was there. And it's kind of a straightaway when you go into that clearing, so that's what kind of when I think back about it, I think, I don't think it was there like before. I think it just popped up. And I really don't feel, I kind of find it hard to believe that it was there. And we weren't the first ones back there on that bike. A couple of the other kids had already went back there. So there was a couple runs that were made before Kathy and I went back there. So, of course, I didn't think about any of this at the time. But now that I'm older and I think back to that day, I think, why was the thing there? What was it doing there? Why would it show up when we were on that mini bike? And I kind of feel like maybe it was curious because it heard the noise from the mini bike, so it wanted to, maybe it was trying to assess a threat to see if we were a threat to it. I guess I just don't know. I can't say, but that's what I kind of feel like, because if it wanted to, it could have charged us and it could have tore us right off that bike, but it didn't, so.
It's interesting. I've had other witnesses on the show that were riding motorcycles or dirt bikes, and then Sasquatch seems to show up. It's interesting when they do that, and you wonder why they do that. If it's, it makes me wonder if it's the noise of the bike that startles him, or if it's curiosity. I wanted to ask you, when it popped its head up and it was looking over the bushes at you guys, did the expression ever change? Or did it have an expression on its face?
No, it had its mouth shut, and you could see the lips, and I was probably 5, 10, 15. I'll bet you we were 15 foot from this thing. If you went into the clearing, this thing was like right there, so I got like a real close-up look at this thing's face and its head, and it was just like stock still, watching us like it was frozen. Had like a frozen look on its face, like it didn't, like, I don't know, I kind of get the feeling that it didn't really want us to see it, or that it, for some reason, it thought that if it stood still, we wouldn't notice it, which I kind of think is absurd, because my cousin Lori, when I talked to her about it, and she told me about her experiences at that same house back there, when she walked through those woods. There was a trail that went all the way through those woods out to the other road, and she had walked through those woods, and she saw it out there also when she was on foot by herself. And she told me that she thought it was strange too, because she said it did the same thing then that it did what I described. Like when she saw it from the side. It was like from a side view. And she said that she felt like she knew that it saw her, and it knew that she was there, but it stood like really frozen still, and it didn't move a muscle. So I asked her what she did, and she said she just kept walking and pretended like she didn't, tried to act like she didn't see it, and just walked as fast as she could and got out of there.
That's really interesting. I had a witness on I interviewed, probably a couple of years ago, and he was talking about walking and seeing the Sasquatch. And the Sasquatch would, when it stepped out in front of him, and he's only 30, 40 feet away from this thing, he said it's like it was pretending to be a tree. And I said, what do you mean by that? And he said it just stood really still. It just reminded him of like freeze tag, when you see a kid that gets in freeze tag. It just stands there real still, like you're not going to see it. And he's only 30, 40 feet away from this thing, and it just kind of stood still like a statue and waited for him to pass by. So that's interesting. You do hear that behavior from these things. Did Lori give you any details about what she saw? Did she go into any sort of...
Yep. She described the face, like from what she could see from the side and the color, and it was probably she thought it was probably about at least 7 feet tall. So we kind of feel like what we saw, we might have saw the same one from the color of its fur and everything, that its hair. But from what she told me, it kind of matched, what I saw. That's the way I felt about it anyway. Of course, what the boys saw when they were walking down the road, nobody really knows, because it was out in a field picking apples, and it was probably, I don't really know how far, I'd have to ask them, but it was far enough out where they couldn't probably get details, of its face or anything, but they obviously could tell it was not a person. since it was this big, black-looking furry thing on 2 feet. I just can't even imagine walking down the road and seeing something like that, walking around on 2 feet, and at first you think it's a bear. We have black bear here. We have cougars. We've got a lot of critters here. The area where this house is at in rural Midland County, if you look at like a satellite view in this county, there's a lot of farms. In the middle, if you look, you'll see there's a lot of like big patches of woods in the middle of farmlands. Like there'll be a cornfield, and then there'll be like a patch of woods and another field. So there's a lot of farmland out there, and all around these woods where this happened, there were fields, farm fields. So there's a lot of, I guess I want to say there's a lot of people and there's a lot of houses, but at the same time there's a lot of farm fields and a lot of patches of woods where something definitely could, I guess, be traveling through. We have a lot of rivers and creeks and stuff like that here.
Let me ask you, I know you had a second encounter, but before we get into that, if someone were to ask you, Linda, what do you think that these things are? And again, there's no wrong answer. What would you say to them?
I think they're like DNA-wise. I think they have both primate and human DNA. I suspect that they may even be like some type of genetic experiment. And I'm not going to, of course, I'm not going to say it's the government because I don't know if it's the government or, something out of this world. But of course, I might be wrong, but I feel that these things have been here. I mean, when I was younger, like I was telling you earlier, when I lived in Oklahoma, we didn't have cable TV. So we didn't have internet, we didn't have cable. And the only thing that I had saw before that happened in that summer when we were on the minibike remotely about Bigfoot or Sasquatch was, if you remember that movie, The Monster of Boggy Creek. Well, I believe it came out in 1975 or 76, and we lived on Guam at the time, and I went and saw that movie. And, of course, at that time, even with that movie, I don't recall those words, those descriptions being mentioned, So we weren't, back then, we weren't really aware of the things that, like I'm aware of now, because of the internet, your show, the things you can see now on TV, other people's work and research. I guess I'm more aware now, and I kind of feel like these things are something they've probably been around for a long, long time, because if you listen to the Indians, the Native Americans, they can all tell you stories about these things that go way, way, way back, certainly before I was ever born. So I think this is probably something that's been here for a lot longer than people realize, is what I think.
Yeah.
But how they got here or why they're here, I guess I just, I can only speculate about that.
I always love to talk to witnesses and ask them that question because they'll give you their opinion on it. And again, there's no wrong answer. I mean, it's not I think sometimes people hear that question that I ask and they think it's a gotcha moment, and there's no gotcha moment on the show. I'm just curious on what people think, as far as what these things are. And I think you're right. I think they have been around for a long time. I think it's fascinating when you talk to witnesses because they're very consistent. Every witness I've ever spoke to is very consistent on what they saw. And in your situation with you and your cousin on the mini bike, it makes me wonder, is it curiosity? Is it just up looking and seeing what you guys are doing? I mean, obviously, if it wanted to take you guys, it would have. And I don't want to sugarcoat it because there is a lot of bad encounters people have where things turn violent really quick. But there's other situations where it doesn't, where they seem to be just kind of curious, checking you out, seeing what you're doing.
Honestly, I'll be honest with you. I have not heard, before I started listening to your show, I had not heard quite so many about the bad encounters until I started listening to the people on your show, tell about their encounters and their stories. And, of course, when you hear all this and you hear about other people's stories and what they went through, and then you think back to what happened to you, you think to yourself, wow, you were really lucky. because that could have been a bad deal. That could have so went the other way. When I heard the story about what happened to you and your brother, wow, I can't even imagine the fear and post-traumatic stress disorder, and that you guys must have went through after all that.
Yeah, it is kind of interesting to look back at that encounter and look back at this whole show. When I first started doing this show, I know I'm at 300 episodes, but when I first started doing this show, my feelings on these creatures, especially with my encounter, honestly, I could care less. I would hope that every hunter out there would put a bullet in one of these things. I don't care if you bring it in or not. Kill them all and let God sort it out. These things are flat out monsters. And then as you start hearing encounters, throughout the 300 shows I've done, or more, I've actually done a little bit more than 300, but you start to find encounters to where they're not so violent, that it seems to be more or less curiosity. I mean, sometimes I have had people on the show where they have violent encounters and the people have done nothing to provoke it, and they have violent encounters. And then sometimes you have people on the show, like your encounter, where it pops its head up. It's just kind of checking you guys out. It's not pursuing you guys. It's not chasing you guys down. It's just kind of watching you guys. And so I've learned so much from doing the show, because you start to realize real quick, okay, that maybe they're not all monsters. Maybe they're not all killing machines. And I know most of the audience thinks I cherry pick the most violent encounters. That's not really true. I just pull out the encounters for the show from all the people I talk to. And the bulk of those encounters aren't happy encounters. Most encounters with these things, I don't think that the Sasquatch truly wants an interaction with people. I hate to break it to most of the people out there who have habituation sites and all this other stuff. I don't think that they truly want interaction with people. I think it's probably the last thing that they want. But they're curious. It's a primate. Just like we're primates, we're curious. And I think that when you look at the different encounters, when push comes to shove, you're dealing with a wild animal that could rip you from limb to limb if it wanted to. But most of the time, they'll get up and kind of leave the area. It's always situations where they don't leave the area and they're provoking you, they're throwing rocks at you, they're growling at you, they're going around and around and around your campsite and just screwing with you. And at that point, it becomes violent. But I think, and it's so hard, it's such an odd topic to talk about. I would imagine it's the same as like sharks. When we think of sharks, we think of Jaws. And I hate sharks. I have like a phobia with sharks. Like with the ocean, I want nothing to do with sharks. But generally speaking, a shark won't attack you unless it's in a position where, I don't know why I'm going off on that tangent, but it's the same with Sasquatch. Sometimes there's violent encounters, sometimes there's not. And I think a lot of times they're just curious about what you're doing in their area. And so they'll come check you out. And I'm curious with that whole situation where your cousin, they own the property out there. If the parents if there was ever a moment where they realized, okay, there's something on the property. Did you ever talk with them?
We never talked I talked to of course, my mom and dad, they didn't live in that house. My aunt and step-uncle did, and they're both passed away now. But none of us kids at that time we never talked to our parents about something like that. But my cousin did tell me that her older sister, that she was in the bedroom with her older sister one night, and they were in bed sleeping, and there was a big hairy hand at the window, on the window screen, and her sister woke up and they saw it, and her sister screamed. And I guess, of course, the parents come running in there, and she said there wasn't much made to do about it. They were probably, you're just dreaming, or you're seeing things or whatever, and they went back to sleep. But when she told me that, and now that after listening to all the things that other people have experienced and how things can escalate, and I think back to that, it sounds to me like that thing was up around the house more than they knew it. And she also told me that the neighbors next to them, they raised pigs or hogs, and their pigs and their were coming up missing also. And I think I think those people probably thought somebody was stealing their pigs, is what I'm thinking. But of course, we don't know that because we were like I said, her and I were like 13, and we didn't talk to, any adults about anything like that. Just a few years ago, I talked to my mom about it one day, and I had told her what happened that day. And she said, "Oh, you kids." She said somebody probably put a Halloween mask out there and to try to scare you kids or something, she said. And I said, "No, Mom." I said, "I don't think so." Because there was other things that happened too on that property. But I didn't really get into details about that. My mom's a skeptic. My brother's a skeptic. They don't believe in that kind of stuff. But, a lot of people, if you've never experienced, anything of that nature, you're not going to believe until you see it with your own eyes. And that's just the way it is.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
I don't hold it against anybody, but now I'm at the age where I'm older now, so now I don't care if people think I'm crazy. It doesn't matter now because I'm older now.
Yeah.
And my observation skills, I think, have improved a lot, and I have a pretty good instinct. And when I think back to that day about the way I felt when it happened and what I did, I think a lot of that was a survival instinct. And, and Lori, she felt the same way because she felt the same way when she walked out of there. Don't scream, don't run, don't make a fuss, just pretend like you didn't see it and just back off and just get out of the area. And I think now that I think about it, it was probably a survival instinct kicking in. And I'm a pretty sensitive person, so I have pretty good instincts, and I think I've been pretty lucky so far about that. Although sometimes you do things, you don't really think about the consequences. Like when I was telling you about how I used to throw vegetable scraps and stuff out in the woods behind my house, and I don't do that anymore.
Yeah, let's talk about that. If you would kind of talk about what you were doing around that property and what you heard and what happened. I know your brother showed up. If you would, for the audience, just kind of walk us into what was going on.
Yeah, well, I moved into my property that I live in now. It's only about a mile from the village that I live in, and I've got woods around. I kind of got woods that surround both sides of my property, my house. I live in a trailer. It's got metal siding, metal roof, and the woods surround both sides of my trailer, and there's woods in back. It's all private property back there. It's not all my property. It belongs to most of it belongs to someone else. But at the time, I didn't have a neighbor to the right of me. There was another house trailer that sits next to mine. And, well, the guy lives in it now, but he wasn't living in it at that time. I moved in here in July of 2010. Well, that fall, probably about the time when summer turns to fall, that was probably about the time of year it was. I had been hearing at night, I'd been hearing occasionally some strange noises out there in the woods, but I didn't really think that much about it. I heard like some whooping noises, and of course I didn't think anything about it. First of all, I've never heard those before. So, I mean, I heard them and I noticed it, but I didn't really think, oh, that's a Bigfoot out there, because I didn't really know that they made those kind of noises. But this night in particular, I was in my bedroom watching TV, and I had a show on. It was a replay of a show, and on the show, the guy on the show was making calls. I don't know if you want me to say the name of the show or not, but
I don't mind.
Anyway,
you talking about finding Bigfoot?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the big guy on there, and everybody can say what they want about the show, and they can laugh, but and I'm kind of disgusted to hear about their the siege at Honobia.
Yeah.
When I heard how they acted and how they took off, I wasn't impressed with the BFRO when I heard how they took off on those people. I felt bad for those two brothers.
Yeah, one of the things with that, I guess I'll address that really quick, is I'm friends with a lot of people in the BFRO, and there is some really good people in the BFRO. I mean, even Matt Moneymaker called me the other night. He's actually was really nice on the phone. He was very, very not like what you see on TV. He was a very nice guy when him and I spoke. And so I think, sometimes you can't hold a whole organization accountable for a few people. You know what I mean? It's kind of like if you you heard some guy at Apple was a drunk driver. You can't hold all
Right.
the employees at Apple accountable for that one guy's action. So, but I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead.
Oh, that's okay. Well, anyway, I was watching, I believe that's what was on TV, what I was watching. Anyway, the guy on there, one of the guys on there was making a call, and I think it was the big guy. I mean, he's got it going on with his calls he makes.
Yeah.
I will say that for him. All of a sudden, on the back of my house toward the woods, my backyard, it sounded like somebody was throwing rocks at my trailer. So the first thing I thought to myself was, okay, there's maybe some neighborhood kids, teenagers or somebody out having fun, playing a prank. And I got up and I went to my dining room window and I opened it, and I didn't see anybody out there. I couldn't see anything out there. I yelled out the window and I said, hey, you better knock it off because I'm calling the cops. And I yelled it really loud, and then I heard this roar out in the woods, and this thing just screamed, and it took off to the west through the woods, and it sounded like a freight train moving through the woods, and it was breaking branches and all kinds of stuff. And just when this thing screamed, it sounded really mad. It just sounded really angry. I kind of got the feeling like maybe either I interrupted something it was doing, or it didn't want me there. And I'm thinking, I guess I was in shock because I'm thinking what I heard, that's what I heard. But when you hear it, you don't, and you're not expecting something like that to happen. You're not out looking for it or asking for it. You don't really want to, I guess you don't really want to think that that's what it is. You don't want to really admit to yourself, well, did I just, is this what I'm really hearing? Because you're always looking for another explanation, I guess, or another, reason that you hear something like that. And I knew it wasn't a bear. I knew it wasn't a cougar, And I went and I sent a text. I don't get a very good cell phone signal with my cell phone in here, but if I put it in my bedroom window, I can send a text out. And I texted my brother, and he'd come over with his dog and his gun. Of course, by the time he came over and went around the yard and everything, he didn't see anything. He said, it was probably pine cones hitting the back of my trailer, blowing off the tree or something. Well, I didn't think it was that windy that night. And the next day when I went out, there was no pine cones to be seen, but there were rocks down there on my boardwalk. I have this little boardwalk that goes along up to my back deck, and then there's a grassy area and a garden area where there's flowers. And I could see some rocks laying around that shouldn't have been there. At least I didn't feel like they should have been there. So I'm going to say, yeah, there's definitely something throwing rocks at my house, and that thing screaming, and it sounded all mad. And also, when it took off through the woods and I couldn't hear it anymore, it stopped somewhere and it screamed again. This time it was a lot further west, and then you couldn't hear it no more after that. I started thinking about, to myself, I think that's what it was. I think it was a Bigfoot. I didn't see it, but I heard it, and I'm thinking that's what it was. And then you start thinking, well, why would it even be around here? Why would it be around, where there's houses and stuff like that, and I started thinking about throwing the vegetable scraps out and stuff out in the woods the way I'd been doing. And I started thinking, geez, maybe I shouldn't be doing that, So I quit doing that. I quit throwing food out in the woods, and I don't do that anymore because that was frightening to hear that, and I can't even imagine what I would have done if I had actually saw it. I probably would have fainted or something.
Yeah, it's one of those things, as you and I were talking earlier, when I was in Texas and I had that thing screaming. I mean, it wasn't a cougar. It wasn't a coyote. It wasn't a fox. I can tell you that much. It wasn't anything I had actually heard before. And I always use the term demonic. And I hate to bring this up with you, but, and I know people say, well, what does a demon sound like? I get that comment on the website all the time, and I guess I don't know. But you just think of the worst thing possible screaming at you, and that's why I guess I always say demonic. But what I heard in Texas, this thing was screaming, and it sounded female, and it sounded pissed. And it was very, I don't even know how to describe it. It was very odd. But from being, as you and I talked, this isn't your first rodeo. It's not like you've never heard a cougar before. It's not like you've never heard a fox before. And usually when those creatures scream, you're talking 4 seconds, maybe 5 tops, and then they're done. And they might scream again, but you're talking 4 or 5 seconds. When this thing was screaming at you, was it just a couple seconds, or was it more long-winded as it was directing?
No, it was long-winded. Both times it screamed, it was long-winded. It was like an air raid. It was like the tornado siren. I'm from Oklahoma, and it starts out real slow, and then it builds up, and then it's like, at the end. It was like that, kind of like the tornado siren. Except for it sounded really angry. It just, at the end, it had that growly, at the end of when it was almost done, it was growling.
Yeah.
Like it came to a growl. In that respect, I'll say it was different than what I had heard. To me, it's different than what I hear when I listen to the things that I hear now, that I see now on the media, or like on your show. If I had to compare it to something, I would compare it to like maybe the Ohio howl. But except for at the end, it was kind of like growling, which made me feel like it was really mad. Like I probably got it really mad by yelling at it, I'm thinking, and challenging it.
Yeah, and I think that's the key when you talk to people, I guess for other interviewers out there. When you talk to people, what's interesting is, so when you hear a cougar scream or do their vocalization, or you hear a fox, or you hear coyotes. Coyotes make some weird noises. Rarely will you ever talk to someone that hears a known animal like that and will attribute emotion to it. They won't say, well, it sounded angry or it sounded mad. They'll just say, I heard like a woman screaming. For someone who's never heard a cougar or a fox or, your coyotes, they'll say it sounded like a woman screaming, but rarely will they ever attribute emotion to it. Now, when these things scream, what's interesting is people will say it sounded mad, it sounded angry when it was screaming at me. And I just think that's interesting.
Yeah, I guess when I think about, when I think about the animals that I've heard before, like the cougar, like I told you about the cougar that was in the back gully of the house I used to live in up north. When it screamed, it just screamed, and then it left the gully and it took off up and around, and then it screamed again, and then I guess it took off. I knew it was a cougar when I heard it. My cousin Carrie was with me, and she's like, oh, the hairs are standing up on the back of her necks and everything. We were freaking out. She's like, what is that? She said, it sounds like a cougar. And if I hadn't have been watching that TV show when I was younger, I probably wouldn't have known that. I've never seen a cougar, in real life. But like I said, we used to watch the Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom when we were younger, and they had a lot of cougars, and different animals on that show. So that's pretty much where I learned about cougars, probably. But my dad said, cougars are, a big cat like that can move from point A to point B within seconds, like cover long distances, and you'll never even hear a stick break.
Yeah.
They won't even make a sound.
Well, your dad's right. Your dad's absolutely right.
That's what he told me. And I heard when on the Chippewa River, I was camping with a couple of my guy cousins one night out in the woods. I heard a baby crying. To me, it sounded like a baby crying. And when I asked my cousin about it, he said it was a bobcat. He said, and they can make, sounds like that, like a baby crying. So I thought that was really bizarre because I had heard other noises that bobcats made, but that was the first time I'd ever heard, a noise like that.
Yeah.
That's what he says. He says they can sound like a human.
Yeah, he's right.
Baby crying in the woods.
Yeah, no, he's absolutely right. Bobcats will make strange noises, and I think a lot of times when people think of coyotes, they think of just the howls and the barks, but coyotes make some weird noises, and foxes make some absolutely ridiculous noises when you're out there. There's been many times where I've been out hunting, and I've stopped and kind of looked back, And I was looking back at Woody and my other brother, and I was like, what the hell was that? And it was a fox. But they make such weird, odd noises. You wouldn't think that would come out of a fox. But so a lot of your known animals will make a lot of strange noises. But when people hear the screaming or like the Ohio howl, the siren call, cougars don't make that noise. Foxes don't make that noise. Coyotes don't make that noise. Bobcats don't make that noise. That's something different. And I always love talking to people who've been out in the woods and they've experienced other animals, because they will stop and they will go, what was that? And it always fascinates me. But Linda, I can't thank you enough for coming on the show and sharing the whole encounter. I think it interests me, because I always think of the biker bar down in Texas, and the guys saying how they don't drive their bikes down when it starts getting dark because the gorillas will throw rocks at them, which sounds ridiculous to people listening because there's no gorillas out running around in the forest in Texas. But if you go to that biker bar, they'll tell you that. And it always makes me wonder, are the gorillas throwing it at the people, or are they irritated by the Harley noise? And
they call them gorillas?
Yeah, they call them gorillas. One of the guys I spoke to down there, he said that he refuses to ride his bike before the sun goes down. He won't ride his bike down there after dark anymore. And this was a big, scary man. I mean, this wasn't a man you'd mess around with. He seemed like the type of guy, he's nice to your face, but I think he'd probably cut your throat in 2 seconds if you upset him.
Do you think that they really feel that these really are gorillas, or do you think that's just what they call them?
That's just what they call them. I asked him one time when I was down there, I asked him, well, what do you mean gorillas? And he said, I don't know how to explain it. He said, it's a gorilla, it's on 2 legs, and it throws rocks. And it's when they go up and down this road down there, it's kind of a lonely road when you drive it, and this bar is in the middle of nowhere. But when they drive down it, they get rocks thrown at them. One guy was actually knocked off his bike down there. He said a gorilla knocked him off his bike. Now, these guys aren't into the Bigfoot world. They aren't into Sasquatch. They don't know. You say Sasquatch to these guys, I don't think they know what that means. So the only way they describe them as gorillas. But I've always wondered if it's the noise from the bike that irritates them or that gets them up and alert. Same thing with you and your mini bike. Almost made me wonder if it really wasn't you guys, if it was the noise of the bike that got it to get up and look and see what was going on. What are you guys doing?
Yeah, I think the human mind has to find an explanation for something that, when you see something and you don't know what it is, your mind needs to find an explanation, that something that explains what you saw. So I can see that why they would call it, a gorilla, because your mind has to come up with something. I think we're humans are like that, or we probably would go nuts. We'd probably go crazy.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think we're wired that way. We try and come up with answers for what we saw or what we experienced. We try and find, just like your folks, it must have been a guy in a mask, because that's the only thing that makes sense. It must have been a man in a mask. Yeah,
the thing about that is my uncle, he was quite the prankster. But like I told my mom, the only thing about him, though, is every time he'd play a prank on anybody, usually it was on my dad or my other uncles, he would have to make sure that he took eventually it would come out in the open and he would get the credit for it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it would be a ha-ha-ha big joke.
Gotcha.
Well, nothing was certainly never mentioned after that ever again about that as far as the adults. And like I said, at that age, you don't go and talk to well, at least we didn't go and talk to all our parents about, they probably would have told us, oh, you kids go find something to do, or, or they turned us loose at camp every year. We ran around the campground at night. We walked the roads and stuff at night through the campground and everything, and there were bears and all, and this was up in the UP, and there were bears and, moose and stuff like that up there, and we didn't care. We didn't think about, things like Bigfoot and stuff like that when we were walking around up there. When you're young, you don't. I don't think you have that caution. I think it's years of experience of living, and when you get older, you've had the experiences. Now, like, I'm a much more cautious person than I was at that age. So
I can imagine. Well, Linda, thank you again for coming on. I really do appreciate you coming on and sharing the encounter. And I posted a portion of it to the blog, and I know the audience was, they were really fascinated by it. So thank you so much for coming on and telling us what happened.
You're welcome. It's a great show. I love it, and keep up the good work, and I wouldn't pay any attention to any naysayers. This is people that are calling in with their own experiences, and I think it makes your show unique.
I appreciate that. Thank you again.
Okay. Good night, Wes.
Well, next up on the show, I want to welcome one of the Bigfoot outlaws, Mr. Tim Coonbo Baker. Tim, how are you tonight?
Doing pretty good.
Thanks
How about yourself?
Oh, I'm doing all right. Thanks for coming on my episode 300 show. You know, it's funny, when I very first started doing this, you and I have talked about this in the past, but, I had a hard time getting anyone to come on the show. And I was so excited when Bear or Jim King and yourself came on, and you guys really were the ones that really jump-started my show. Because
well, thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. Like I said, I had such a hard time getting people to come on, and for people out there, if they're listening, if you go to YouTube and you type in Bigfoot Outlaws, you can listen to Coonbo, Bear, and Matt. They do a show. I put it up on the blog every time they get a new show, and I always appreciate listening to you guys and the knowledge that you guys have. But thank you so much for being here tonight.
I'm honored to be here. And I appreciate the invitation.
Yeah, no, the honor was mine. You did a show your last show that you guys did. You were talking about infrasound, and I find that fascinating. And I wanted to get your opinion on things. Sometimes I'll have witnesses on the show where they haven't seen anything, but they have this strange, overwhelming fear for no reason. And they're in a situation, and I'm talking about guys that have been out hunting their whole life, guys that have been hunting for 20, 30 years, and they'll walk into an area, and all of a sudden they'll get this feeling like they're being watched. It's a very uneasy feeling. And I wanted to ask you, do you think that is infrasound, or what we know as infrasound, or do you think that's something more of a sixth sense we have as humans that maybe we've lost over a period of time?
I believe it can be either one. Like, for instance, I have law enforcement friends and such that have been in areas, they've been on a call or something, in a big metropolitan area, and they're going into some place, and, they get this crazy, irrational, fear feeling, and so they stop. And it turns out that that there was somebody waiting there to ambush them, and I think that's the sixth sense. But there are definitely, you can get that type of feeling can be triggered by infrasound as well. So it could be out in the woods. It could really be just about either, and unless you had some good recording equipment going, it would be hard to determine, what happened. But if you get other things that go along with it besides just the really bad uneasy feeling, if you get the strong fatigue, upset stomach, maybe dizziness, blurred vision. I mean, there's a whole gamut of responses that the human body can have to infrasound. If you get some of these other things going on, then you can pretty much say that you've been zapped by infrasound. And just so the readers know, infrasound are the frequencies from 20 hertz, from 0 to 20 hertz, below the normal range of human hearing. There are people who can hear down to like 15 hertz and such as that. There are even people who can sing notes that low, but but that's way the exception rather than the rule. It's the frequencies down actually that are typically like in the neighborhood of like 8 to about 12 hertz, 8 to maybe 13 hertz, that really spike these very strong reactions. There is a frequency there around, I don't know, I can't remember the exact frequency, but there's a frequency that your eyeballs resonate at. And when they are doing their infrasound sweeps at us, there are points there during that sweep when they pass through the frequency range that the resonant frequency of your eyeball, and it can actually create apparitions or a limited type of hallucination. You'll catch movement out of the corner of your eye, or you'll see say a patch, something gray wavering off in your peripheral vision, or you'll think that something has just, like a mouse or a rat or something has just run by you. It can actually affect you that way.
As you guys were talking, as you were giving your presentation on infrasound, which I thought was all these people out there, and I know all the Bigfoot researchers and investigators listen to my show, they should invite you to the conference to speak on this, because I was fascinated by it. I gave my amateurish description on infrasound, probably episode 7, on what I knew. But what was interesting is when I looked it up, I think it was Walt Disney got busted for it. He would put it into his movies. And so when they had a scene in the movie to where you were in fear, or let's say you wanted to be sad, they wanted to evoke that emotion in you, they actually did infrasound in some of these movies. And what ended up happening is people would come out of the movie theater and they were sick. They were dizzy. They were disoriented. They had all of these side effects of the actual infrasound. So infrasound is a real thing. And I'm just curious, when I talk to witnesses and they say they feel sick afterwards, after an encounter or something like that. Right. Is it adrenaline? Is it like the adrenaline dump? Because it can make you feel ill too, having adrenaline pump through your body. Or is it infrasound? And so that's why I'm on the fence with Sasquatch and infrasound. There's times where I'll hear encounters and I'm thinking, God, that sounds like infrasound. And then there's other encounters where I think your adrenaline was pumping a little bit too much for too long and made you feel kind of ill. So it's kind of a hard balance. Is it really? Do you think that? Yes, it is. Do you think that these creatures put off infrasound?
Oh, absolutely. And we've been able to record it on several occasions. I wish that I had a way of reproducing, of playing some of our tapes here on your show, but they wouldn't come through. But we have found that this certain model of digital tape recorder that one of our guys use, it accidentally works as a pretty good infrasound detector. The microphone itself is not rated to record infrasound. However, infrasound is a long wavelength pressure wave through the air, and what happens is the in the internal guts of a microphone, many times you have a mylar or some type of a wafer with an element, electrical element, movable element that's bonded to that. And we have found that with this one particular microphone, that when it is hit with infrasound, because of the long wavelength of the pressure waves of the sound, it bangs that wafer off the stops in and out. So you hear this is not going to be as fast, but you hear you hear like a flutter of the thing, banging off the stops. Well, what you're hearing obviously is not infrasound. What you're hearing is the mechanical impact of the guts of the microphone off part of the microphone body. But it produces a sound that the recorder will pick up, and it allows us, and then we can go look at that on an oscilloscope, and we can look at the frequency of these bangs or clicks or whatever, and see that that they are in the infrasound range. And so we know what's happened. We have also been able to, when we are able to, get a hold of some actual infrasound recorded with a microphone designed for it. Of course, you look at it under a spectrum analyzer, and you can see that surprisingly, the energy of the sound is very tightly controlled. I mean, the guys that emit this stuff, or I think the females can emit it as well. I mean, they're like the Pavarotti of the animal world. They can control their voices or their laryngeal sacs or however it is that they generate it. They have very, very good tonal control of the infrasound that they produce. So we have several different ways of looking at it, and this accidental way that we discovered is really handy, because that's one of the things that people. Well, how do you know you've recorded it? Well, you don't really, because you can't really listen to it. You can take a signal and you can boost the frequency. You can electronically manipulate it. But here we can actually pick up this mechanical vibration of the guts of the microphone, look at the signal on an oscilloscope, and see that, hey, by golly, look at here, this microphone was vibrating at sweeping back and forth from about 7 to about 15 hertz, and son of a gun, what could do that? So.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that, because someone had sent me some audio probably a week ago. They had sent me this piece of audio, and I was listening to it, and I was like, God, this would be one of the best audio, except for it sounds like it's overmodulated. And the only way I would describe the audio they sent to me, and I wish I had it, I'd play it for you, but it sounded like if you took the internal components of a speaker, like a microphone, like what I'm on right now, you took that and just shook it as fast as you could, and you get that reverberation, as it's
right.
And that's what it sounded like. And I asked the guy, I said, did you edit this at all, or did you guys try and clean this up? And he said, no, that's just what we got. But it sounds like a huge vibration. I mean, you can hear this thing going off in the background, but you hear the vibration more than what you hear of this thing going off in the background. And it's just fascinating to me. I was always into the infrasound, and then I backed away from it because I wasn't really sure, is it these things putting off infrasound, or is it fear that we have that's tripping people up, where they feel kind of ill, where let's face it, when you run into one of these things, you're going to feel sick afterwards. You're going to be in shock afterwards. Your adrenaline's going to be through the roof. But you're right. Those secondary components of being affected by infrasound, when you start hearing that, it kind of throws you for a loop. It's like, well, why is this guy still sick 6 hours later after the infrasound? Right. Why is he still talking about throwing up afterwards?
Right. Yeah, you typically have to go through at least one sleep cycle. If you've been zapped good with infrasound, you have to go through at least one good sleep cycle for your brain to reset, sometimes a couple of sleep cycles. We had one of our researchers, a lady by the name of Kelly Mattingly. She's passed away now, but she was very strongly affected by infrasound, and she exhibited all the classic symptoms of anaphylactic shock when she was exposed to it. That's one way we knew when, my dog Bo plus Kelly, were the best indications when the boogers were getting really, really close that we had. This was back in the days before we had decent thermal imaging and such as that. But her face would swell, her eyes would swell shut. She would have she would get shortness of breath. She would get a pounding headache. She would get sick to her stomach, and the only way that she could get over it was she had to go to bed. And sometimes it might take her a couple of days to get over it. But it was and then I had done a lot of experimentation with infrasound back when I worked for the government back in the early 1980s, and in a particular lab that I worked in, where we were doing a lot of seismic simulation testing, high-level seismic simulation testing of safety-related components to nuclear reactor control systems. And, they think that, well, as was shown in the disaster in Japan a few years ago, the biggest danger to a nuclear power plant are earthquakes. And so we have to test to the highest level possible, plus a safety margin of the highest level possible of earthquake that you could have in that part of the world. And and earthquakes run in their frequency range is around 0 to 35 hertz. So that takes in the entire infrasonic range from 0 to 20 hertz. So, we would see sometimes the results of infrasound on people that were working in the area, and sometimes not. It was weird. Some people were affected, some people were not. But I began to, I just got curious and began to study it, and that's when I got to studying using sound as a weapon, and I found a lot of information. And back then, I could get a hold of some of the technical library information that through like Redstone Arsenal that regular folks can't get a hold of. And but I learned quite a bit. I studied quite a bit about a lot of research that the French did on sonic weapons. Research that the Germans did on the sonic weapons, and then that we have done. And the thing that kept just repeating between them were the symptoms. And then they even got into stuff like unhealthy buildings, like buildings that had rooms that people would feel uneasy in or would claim that were haunted or whatever, and they would find that there would be something wrong in the HVAC system, that's heating, ventilation, and air conditioning, and that there would be a standing resonant wave in the air ducts that was in the infrasonic range, and would cause problems with the people trying to work in these buildings in that room, and and then what they did to fix the problems. There was a vast wealth of knowledge, and then as I continued on, I was already actively researching Bigfoot back then, but I started putting two and two together, and about that time, the Dr. Muggenthaler came out with her ideas and her studies that elephants can produce infrasound, and then also tigers and other animals and such. And I contacted her and I said, I do some turkey hunting, and anybody who's ever done much turkey hunting, you'll know that if you're close to them, say within 20, 30 feet, while they're strutting and drumming, you can literally feel the ground shake. And I said, well, somehow turkeys are producing infrasound. They're shaking, literally shaking the ground. And if a 25-pound tom turkey can shake the ground, or a 400-pound Bengal tiger can shake the ground, certainly, a 600 to 1,000-pound booger ought to be able to shake the ground with infrasound. And there are numbers of animals that have since been discovered that produce infrasound. So, it sort of the light bulb turned on, and I started, zeroing in on the effects of things and started trying to actually record it. And I had limited success because at the time, the microphone that Dr. Muggenthaler was using was very expensive. It was, out of my personal, price range. So I built my own microphone with a mylar wafer and little ultra small accelerometers and some signal conditioners and such. And unfortunately, my microphone was very, very susceptible to wind interference, very susceptible to weather issues, and I only got a chance to actually deploy it successfully in the field a couple of 3 times, but the results I got were quite promising. And I was using a modified JV, I can't remember if it was I think it was a JVC stereo VCR to operate as poor man's digital audio tape, to try to record this stuff. And I had done a little bit of modification of some of the signal processing electronics inside the VCR. But anyway, I was able to get enough stuff to go back and analyze it and prove to myself that yes, they are producing infrasound.
Yeah, and that's interesting that you came up with that conclusion. And most people, if they don't understand, if you actually research infrasound, and I recommend people go to Bigfoot Crossroads on YouTube, go to the Bigfoot Outlaw Radio episode 31, Zapped by a Bigfoot, where Tim Coonbo gives his presentation. It's probably one of the best presentations. I wish you would have done that, and then I could have just copied your work back when I did episode, I think it was 7 or 8.
Yeah.
I wish you would have done that because I would have stolen everything you put up. But what was interesting about it is most people don't know infrasound can kill a person. And it can cause a lot of different problems with people. It can cause organ failure. It can cause so it's a real thing in the scientific community that we know about. I wanted to ask you, Coonbo, your personal opinion. I had an insider one time come on the show, and I had to end up taking the shows down, but she described it as a sonic weapon. She called it something else. It was some sort of government name, but I asked her to dumb it down for me on what she was talking about, and she had described it as like a sonic weapon. And what she said is there's a certain frequency you can send out, and these Sasquatches will come to that frequency, and it pisses them off. And it makes it easier to kill one of these things because they'll actually come to that frequency sound. What are your thoughts on something like that?
Well, I think that's probably true. I have never tried to generate a specific sound to attract them, but I do know that that there are certain pieces of music that they don't like. Like, they are not Led Zeppelin fans. They do not like When the Levee Breaks. I have had several times them come in pissed off with me blasting When the Levee Breaks in the middle of the night. There are, and it may not be an infrasonic frequency that draws them in. I mean, there are other sounds and stuff that will bring them in out of curiosity, but there are some that like I said, some rock music I know will bring them in pissed off, and we actually have a call that we do, that Bear and I do. We call it the piss off call. If we've been trying to call them up and they haven't responded to our normal stuff, then when we bring out the big guns is when we do the piss off call. And if there's any within a mile or so, they may not come, but they will definitely give you their opinion of what they think about your call. They may just scream back at you with a dominance call, but not come. But they let you know that, hey, you want some of me? Bring your ass over here. and then we've had several very memorable instances where we do the piss off call, and here they come, wide ass open, and they end up right up in our face screaming at us. So, well, when I say right up in our face, I mean within 40, 50 feet, sometimes a little closer, screaming at us. Obviously very aggravated.
Yeah, and I know you guys have an expedition coming up. Do you want to talk about that?
It's an expedition for members of the Bigfoot Outlaw Hideout Facebook page, and we're going to be. It's going to be a meet and greet camp out type of opportunity where we are. We're going to be, and this is our first trial. We're going to try doing this, and if it works out okay, then we'll do more of them. But we've invited around in the neighborhood of 70 to 80 guests, and actually we haven't invited them. We've given them the opportunity to sign up to come to this camp out, and at an undisclosed location that I'm not going to reveal on the air.
Yeah, no, I understand.
And we will be it's primarily a meet and greet, but we'll also be taking the opportunity to educate as well, to answer questions, to do teaching and such as that, and try to spot future research partners and such as that, folks that may be wanting to delve into this even deeper.
I know I was trying to sweet talk Bear into letting me come. I'm not sure when it's at, but I was trying to sweet talk him the other night. I was like, you got to let me come in. But, if it's overbooked, I understand. I would imagine you guys have a pretty big audience that wants to go.
Yeah, the trouble is the facility only allows a certain number of people in the campground, not just campers, but, they only allow a certain number of people through the gate into the campground. So we're limited there. So, I took a lot of flack when I first came out with my ideas about infrasound and Bigfoot back in the 90s, and now it's a generally accepted part of the world of Bigfoot research. Is that infrasound is recognized as being for real, obviously infrasound is for real, but it's pretty well recognized that Bigfoot do produce infrasound. Now, how they actually do it is like anything else. When we think we know something, then that opens up a lot of extra questions. We don't know exactly how they do it, but our friend, one of my longtime research partners, and he and I have been chasing boogers together since back in the 1970s, Jim Hart, otherwise known as Bubba Gump, on our Facebook page. He has done a fair amount of studying on laryngeal sacs. We know that a lot of the great apes have them, and that one of the things that it allows them to do is produce very low frequency noises. And very well could be that Bigfoot have that laryngeal sac, or it could be just that they're able to produce that just by the sheer volume of their lung and laryngeal structure. Obviously they have a lot greater internal volume than ours would, so they can produce a much lower frequency than we can.
It's interesting. I know when I was doing the Infrasound show, I had looked up a case study, and there was a guy who, and it might be their lungs, you might be right, just the sheer capacity of their lungs are able to produce this infrasound sound. But what was interesting is I remember when I was researching the infrasound, I came across this case study that the scientists did, and there was a guy in an office, and just kind of show you the effects of infrasound. So there's a guy in an office, and he started acting like a schizo. He started thinking he was hearing voices. He was having the guy was just going nuts, and no one could figure out what was wrong with this guy. So they moved him to another office, and he stopped acting like that. So they put the new employee in his old office. Well, the new employee started having the same problems as the old employee. So they moved him to another office. And they brought in another employee and put him back in that old office. Well, every person they put into this office started acting very, very strange, and they couldn't figure out what was going on. If this office was haunted or what was going on with these guys. And what they found was the fan, this is a very dumbed-down version of it, but the fan was tilted. And as it spun around, it was a ceiling fan. And as it spun around, because it was tilted, it was creating a small dose of infrasound to whoever was sitting below this fan. And it was a bunch of scientists that figured out it was the ceiling fan. And as it rotated around, I mean, this sounds like crazy talk, but it's a case study you can look up. As it spun around, it actually created a small amount of infrasound. It was making whoever sat below that fan sick. They were having delusions, and so it is a real thing. I mean, the infrasound is a real. Well,
there's a very well documented case down in Little Rock, Arkansas, of a quote unhealthy building unquote, and they had people were having all kind of health issues and such as that in that building, and they found that again they had a problem with the fan in the heating and air system, and they found that it was rotating at a frequency that was exciting a a standing resonant wave in the ductwork in the building, in some part of the building, which was causing all these problems. All they had to do was either change the speed of the motor or change the pulleys to the fan slightly, and boom, problem goes away. We had the exact same problem in a classroom where I work. There was one classroom that people didn't like. People used to complain about it, that this room gives me the creeps. I can't do well on tests in this room. Yeah. I mean, it'd been going on for a while. Well, I got to reading about the case study down in Arkansas, so I caught a trusted employee that after hours, and I said, "Hey, let's go up there and take a look at the air handler for this room, for this part of the building." And we go up there and we look at the RPM of the motor and the size of the pulleys, and I run some calculations. Boom, we got a 12 hertz standing wave in the ductwork. And then we get to looking. Well, lo and behold, we look back at the original drawings when the building was built, and the original specs of the air handler. Well, those weren't the factory sized pulleys that were on that air handler. Somebody had changed them in the past. The pulley wore out and it broke, and they just grabbed whatever was handy and threw on there. So we went back to the factory sized pulley. The resonant frequency of the ductwork jumped up to near 30 hertz. Problem gone.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. So we haven't had a bit of trouble. Any complaints about that room since then? But it is a very well documented phenomenon.
Yeah, no, it is, and I agree with you. And it's interesting as I talk to witnesses that have come across Sasquatch, and they've either been growled at, roared at, or some sort of vocalization. Not always, but sometimes. Witnesses will talk, and I'll pass it off sometimes, and I'll go, well, I understand your emotions are running high. It must be that adrenaline. And then they'll tell me, I was still throwing up the next day. And you can't pass it off as adrenaline. Adrenaline comes and goes as quickly as it comes, it goes, and it can make you feel kind of ill, but you're not going to be ill the next day. I remember I had a witness on one time, Gord, who was a biker, and he was talking about he rode mountain bikes, and he was talking about feeling hot. He was getting growled at, but he was feeling hot. And then he started taking his clothes off. And, you can't really, how do you explain that? You can't pass it off as just simply, well, he's just freaking out. He's scared. It's adrenaline. The feeling of feeling hot and taking your clothes off, there's something else is going on there. Or like the other witness I was telling you about, where he's throwing up the next day. I can understand you throwing up after an encounter. I can even understand you throwing up hours after the encounter. But 24 hours later, I don't know what to say to that.
Exactly. We know that that infrasound can. Let me see here. I'm going through my notes here of the some of the organs that we know that infrasound can excite. We know that, for instance, like it can excite the frequency, the resonant frequency of the brain, your liver, your heart, your eyes. As well as the cochlea of your ears. There's a wide range of the organs in your body that will vibrate or be excited by infrasound, and we don't know what. You don't know what kind of a combination of reactions that it's going to evoke in you as they are sweeping through these frequencies. And that's another thing that I discovered from recording them, is that they don't just hit you with one frequency. They do what we used to call a sine sweep. It's like it'd be like sort of like whistling. It's a constant smoothly changing note up and down through the infrasound range. But now, one thing we have found that they do use little infrasonic bursts for. And I think it's because of what's been going on when we've recorded this, is that, you've heard the little location whoops that even on Not Finding Bigfoot they do it. The whoop.
Yeah.
When they're moving in close on us, they don't want to do that to give away their location, but they've got to keep in touch with their buddies, so they will use these little infrasonic bursts. And we've actually recorded through the microphone clipping that I was talking about earlier. We've recorded these little.
Yeah. That's exactly what it sounds like. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, these little bursts, and
like the microphone's vibrating or something. The internal organs.
It's sort of like a speaker clipping that's overdriven, that you're driving a speaker with too many watts,
exactly,
and you're banging it off the stops.
Yeah.
Well, these infrasonic waves are clipping the microphones. They're banging the microphone elements off the stops, and we have recorded that, as we have also picked up sometimes on thermal a booger trying to maneuver around on us and trying to sneak up on us. And, it just, I was wondering what that was, and it just hit me here recently that, hey, they're not trying to zap us with that. They're trying to keep in touch with their buddies, to let them know where they are. And, that makes sense. You always have to think like a Bigfoot. Why would they be doing this? And that's the most plausible thing that I have been able to come up with for these little single frequency infrasonic bursts.
Let me ask you, Coonbo, because you're one of the few guys I go to with questions whenever I have things, and I know you and I have talked privately about, sometimes someone will contact me with an encounter that's way off, and I'll call you and we'll discuss it. And I don't know if you want to talk about this. If you don't want to talk about it, you can just say no comment. You're not going to hurt my feelings. Not to change the subject a little bit, but I've had witnesses on that have seen the lights, and I realize for the audience it's not a Bigfoot related subject, or it may not be a Bigfoot related subject. And I had to eat crow a little bit on the lights because I just thought crazy people saw these lights until I saw them, and then it was very humbling for me to actually see them because I had to, eat crow and shut my mouth a little bit, and maybe I don't know as much as I thought I did. Mm-hmm. But have you ever seen the lights people talk about? Have you ever come across when you're out there and you seen anything strange like that, or come across anything strange with regard to these lights?
I saw something one time in the daylight that still has me puzzled. And the only thing I can think of is, based on things that I have read since then, that about them exciting the resonant frequency of your eye, is that I think that maybe what I was being zapped. But I caught a gray blob shoot out of some bushes beside me and shoot forward and then go back into the bushes, and just like it dove down into the bushes in front of me. Now, I'm a flesh and blood type person, but when I read one of these case studies about that they were able to reproduce in the lab, purposely stimulating the human eye at its natural resonant frequency, and that this was one of the very common effects that was induced. I think that that's what I saw was it was due to me being zapped, because this was a really, really boogery area that I was in, and that it's got a long history of sightings, and it was very thick cover. And I think that I was right up on top of one, and he zapped me really, really strongly, and caused me to see this gray blob. And that's one of the exact descriptions that was in this case study that I read, was they would see gray blob shaped apparitions. And that's basically what I saw. Now, I have heard other people talk about seeing these lights at night. And I know several very reputable researchers. In fact, Mike McLean, who had the Alabama Bigfoot Research Forum, he was a very straight up, no nonsense, no BS kind of a guy, and he experienced that and called me up and asked me about it if I had seen anything exactly like that, and I had not. I have not seen the what he described it as was like red souped up lightning bugs, sort of, or fireflies. Is that sort of what you saw?
Yeah, what I saw wasn't red though. It was a different color.
Yeah.
But sometimes you talk to witnesses and they see red lights, they see blue lights, they see green lights. And there's a lot of people I've had on the show in the past who, again, it seems like it's separate from the Sasquatch phenomenon. It's a separate issue. But it still fascinates me. And it seems like every Bigfoot researcher, investigator, person I've spoken to, I would say probably 90% of them have seen the lights, but they don't talk about it. And I wonder what the lights are. What is it that people are seeing? Because I can tell
one of the things it could be is there is one of the person in the outlaw group has had multiple torn retinas that occurred in close proximity to Bigfoot. If anybody's ever had an impact to their eye that of sufficient strength that it could have damaged their eye, you've seen colors and flashes and such as that. I know I have, but it could very well be a side effect of the retina of the eye trying to the eye is resonating, and that's one thing that happens is when something is resonating at its resonance frequency, a small increase in the energy, in the acoustic energy at that resonant frequency can cause a huge, like an exponential effect in the resonating object. It doesn't take much to make it start tearing itself apart. And I believe that's what's happened where people have had, retina separations due to infrasound or large, explosions or such as that. And obviously that would cause flashes of light, things like that.
Yeah, I got a video I need to send you. I'll send it to you. I'll send you the unedited version of it. But it was me and Woody, we were driving up to an area where we had our encounter. We were on a different road, and we just saw this, I don't know how to describe it, just a ball of light. And actually, I didn't see it at first. Woody's the one that saw it. He pulled over, and then when I jumped out of the car, I was like giving him crap about it. I was like, you've seen a light. And then when I stepped out, I was like, holy crap, there's a light there. And there was no reason for it to be there. There was zero explanation for it to be there. I couldn't even tell you exactly what. It's just a ball of strange light. But not to switch gears on you, Coonbo. I know you're not feeling.
Well, I've got a picture that's got a ball of light in the background that I took myself, that I've always wondered about. I can share it with you. And
yeah, I'd love to see it.
Yeah, it's just I took a series of pictures in an area, and in one picture, back through the woods, there's a light. I didn't notice it with my eyes. I didn't see it, but it showed up on the film.
Yeah, no, the one that we saw, it was very visible. It was actually lighting an ambient light around the trees around it. It wasn't shining like a flashlight. It was very ambient-like, but it just threw me off when I saw it. I was like, well, what is that? And I've been to that place a million times before, so I know exactly where the light was at. And it wasn't like in a place where that made any sense. It was kind of on the edge of a cliff over the Lewis River, and right there the Lewis River runs at like 20, 30 miles an hour. And I say river loosely. It's more like a creek right there, but it just threw me off. I really didn't know what to make of it. Yeah, so I was just kind of curious if you had seen anything like that before.
I've heard of it, and I've got a picture that this light showed up in that I've wondered, well, where did that come from? What is that? And it was taken with an older digital camera, and I was just wondering if it was a digital aberration or what. But I have heard people talk about seeing lights out there in the woods at night, but I personally have never seen anything like that.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate the answer. And again, I know you're not feeling well. I don't want to keep you too late. But the other question I wanted to ask you is these roadside encounters. And here's what throws me off about the roadside encounters. And I've had a couple of them on over the last couple of weeks of people seeing these things run across the road. Have you ever thought about why the Sasquatch wait till the last minute to cross a road? Hate to ask you a question like the chicken crossing the road, but for me, when I hear these encounters, and I believe these people, I mean, there's no reason not to believe them. When you hear the behavior of the Sasquatch, it sounds like they wait till the last minute and then they walk across the road when the car's right there. They don't wait for the car to pass. They walk right in front of it.
Yeah, if you go back and look at the size of them, look at the reports. Rarely do they say that, well, there was a 10-foot Bigfoot walked across the road in front of me. You don't hear that very often. Although we had a 12-footer try to run across the road in front of us at down in Texas one time. But most of the time, I'd say 95% of the time or better, it's a 6 to 7 footer, maybe 8-footer at the most.
Yeah, you're right.
It's the juvies. They're counting coup. They're daring each other. They're, hey, Og, you ain't got a hair on your ass if you won't run across in front of this car.
Yeah.
Yeah, that kind of a deal. Yeah, they're doing it for entertainment. They're bored. They definitely do stuff like that just to yank our chains. That's my take on it. But
yeah, you might be right.
I agree. I've seen it happen too many times. But now, occasionally you'll run into somebody that will they'll see them. There's enough reports of people seeing them out there chasing deer. That they see the deer running across, and all of a sudden, holy moly, here's a booger running across behind the deer. But there's obviously sometimes that they don't see the deer, but they see the boogers. But when they get focused in on their game, some kind of game they're trying to catch, they can sort of block out, approaching cars and such. But I think a lot of the stuff is that they purposely, that it's younger ones, daring each other, trying to in effect count coup on us or build up their esteem within the troop.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because I think you're right. Actually, most of the encounters I found on the show, people will say it wasn't that big. It was 6.5, maybe 7 feet tall, and ran across the road. And I don't know that I've had. I mean, I'm sure the audience will correct me, but I don't know that I've had people that say it ran across the road and it was 10, 11 feet tall, run across the road. Right. It seems like it was 6.5.
Yeah, that's rare.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's extremely rare. And another thing that goes along with that, you'll hear people say that hey, I was driving along and I came across one crouched on the side of the road. And then when if they describe it, how tall it is, they'll say, well, it was only like 4.5, 5 feet tall. Well, that's a young one, a really young one, that got scared. And they're just hunkering down, trying to, oh God, let him go by, and they're scared, and they're just hunkering down. But I've read lots of reports of, driver of car, passenger in car spots Bigfoot crouched on side of road or something like that, and it turns out that it's a small one, 4.5, 5 feet tall. But the ones that are running across the road, they're like 6, 6.5, 7.5 feet tall. It's the juvies that are out there cutting up. I mean, think about it. That's what we used to do when we were kids. We would get in a brushy area on the road in sort of an out of the way place, and we would wait for a car to come, and we would jump out of the brush and run across the road in front of the car and dive into the brush on the other side and flatten out. I mean, we used to do that just for something to do as kids, and out there where I grew up. I mean, we did it. We did it dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of times. I mean, there wasn't much else to do out there.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it does come down to probably juveniles, because the moment you said that, it clicked with me, because you're right. The witnesses I've had on, they tend to be a smaller creature than generally what they describe.
I talked to a female ranger in one of our larger, more well-known national parks several years ago, and one of our outlaw members was working up there at the time in the area as a sheriff's deputy, and I was talking to this. She was one of the rangers that hung around, worked this area around this very large campground. I mean, a big campground, one of the more popular ones in the national park, in that particular park. And she said they had a bunch of juvie boogers that juvenile. She called them juvenile delinquent boogers. That well, she didn't call them boogers. She called them Sasquatch. I got a bunch of juvenile delinquent Sasquatch that streaked the camp. And she said they come running through the camp, slapping garbage cans, slapping the sides of travel trailers and RVs, and hooting and hollering and making a big racket. And they'll start over here and they'll run out over here, and and then you'll hear them up on the side of the hill, cackling and carrying on laughing. And she said, then wait an hour or so later, and they'll come back the other way, doing the same thing coming through, and. And said they do it on a fairly regular basis. They'll do that about every. Of course, as the troop is feeding around, about every week and a half, 2 weeks, it'll bring them back into that area, and that's when they have these, juvie Sasquatch, juvenile delinquent Sasquatches streak the camp.
That's interesting. That's really interesting. It's interesting behavior. I think you nailed it when you're talking about the one crossing the road, then these other ones running through the camp and hitting the campers, and maybe it's boredom. Who knows? Yeah. I'm thinking about getting my son is coming to this outing, and he's like 6'4", and he wears like a size 15 or 16 shoe, and I'm thinking about getting him to streak the camp so people can see a Bigfoot,
Make sure no one's armed.
No, just kidding. I'd never do anything that could be construed as a hoax. But
yeah, no, I hear you. It's in good fun. I hear you.
Yeah, throw a cheap wig on his head, and he can scare the bejeebers out of some folks.
Yeah. Well, Tim Coonbo Baker, if you get a chance, check out his YouTube, Bigfoot Crossroads. It's called the Bigfoot Outlaw Radio. If you go to YouTube, just type in Bigfoot Outlaw Radio. It's Bigfoot Crossroads, but you can hear them every week. They'll come on, and I enjoy the show. It's one of the few Bigfoot shows. As you know, it's hard to find a good Bigfoot show out there that it's not a lot of people patting each other on the back, and but you guys go into a lot of different topics, and it's fascinating. I highly recommend it. If you go to YouTube, again, it's Bigfoot Crossroads, Bigfoot Outlaw Radio, Mr. Tim Coonbo Baker. It's an honor having you on my 300th episode. I can't think of anyone. You'd be in my top 2 people I'd want on the show, so thank you for coming on.
I appreciate that. And I truly appreciate the invitation. This is pretty cool.
Yeah, it was cool having you on. Thanks again, Tim.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much.
And that's it for tonight, everyone. Remember, if you've had an encounter, shoot me an email. My email is
black thing go from left to right, and I thought, I'm going to die out here. No one's ever going to know. Black thing go from left to right, and I thought, I'm going to die out here. No one's ever going to know.
I couldn't believe what my eyeballs were showing me. I'll never forget how evil the eyes were. It was horrible. I mean, I've never seen nothing that evil.
It ran towards me at a rate that I can't even explain. Turned and stared at me, and this look of, I just want to kill you. I want to say it was human, but it wasn't.
He was yelling at me to grab a gun. I was like, for what? He said, just grab a gun. and there's footprints all the way to the door of my house. It had went inside my garage all the way to the door.
911, what are you reporting?
Jesus Christ, you better...
Sir?
See ya!
Hello?
Get somebody out here.
What's going on now, sir?
That son of a bitch is about 6'9", I don't know.
Do you see him now, sir?
Yes, I'm looking right at him.
Uh-oh.
You're listening to Sasquatch Chronicles. Check us out online at sasquatchchronicles.com. If you've had an encounter, email me. My email address is wes@sasquatchchronicles.com. Welcome to the show, everyone. Thanks for being here tonight. Got a great show planned for you this evening. Got several witnesses coming up. I know I'll be having Linda on, and Linda had a very interesting encounter when she was young on a mini bike. Her and her cousin saw one of these creatures pop up over a brush and watch them. Interesting account. And I'll also be having Tim Coonbo Baker on. He's from the Bigfoot Outlaw Radio, and we'll be talking about Infrasound tonight, along with any other questions I can sneak in and ask him. But you know, infrasound and Sasquatch, there's kind of a debate going out there whether they give off infrasound. If you've had an encounter and you'd like to be on the show, shoot me an email. My email address is wes@sasquatchchronicles.com. I can't believe I'm at 300 shows. You know, when I very first started doing this, I honestly thought, I hope I can at least put out 5 shows that people will actually listen to. And to hit 300 is a huge milestone for me. Means a lot to me. I want to take a moment to thank all of the listeners, not only in the United States, but in the UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, all of the people who take time to listen to the show. You know, I get a lot of nice emails from people, and just thank you so much to everyone who's ever sent me a kind word. I absolutely love this. I never dreamed I'd be doing this for a living. You know, I was just a dumb guy that stacked lumber, and I found myself thrust into this position, and I absolutely love it. I love talking to people about their encounters. And again, if you've had any sort of encounter, shoot me an email. Again, it's wes@sasquatchchronicles.com. But I also want to thank all of my past guests who've ever been on the show. You guys and gals really are the ones that make the show. It's not, you know, so much anything that I'm doing. You guys make the show, and I want to thank past and actually future guests for taking the time to come out and talk about your encounters. It's been a great ride, and I don't even know what else to say.